Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kristen Smith, and I am the director for the Center for Women's and Gender Studies here at the University of Texas. And welcome to our Feminist Futures, Feminist Past series. This is the session In Front of the World, translating Beatriz Nascimento. And we are very, very excited to have you all here with us today. One of the beautiful things about being virtual is that we have people from all over the world that are able to join us, and it's just a pleasure and an honor to have you. As is our custom at the University of Texas at Austin, I would like to begin with our land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the indigenous lands of Turtle Island, the ancestral name for what is now called North America. Moreover, we would like to acknowledge the Alabama Chata, Cado, Carito, Comecrudo, Coatlitan, Comanche, Kickapoo, Lipanapachi, Tonkawa, and Isleta del Sur Pueblo, and all the American Indian and indigenous peoples and communities who have been or have become a part of these lands and territories in Texas. So it is my pleasure to get us started today. We are going to first begin by introducing ourselves a little bit. And so we have a set of panelists that we are going to introduce in a bit. But before we introduce our panelists, we would like to first introduce ourselves. Because as you all know, this is a project that is born out of a translation project. The project to translate Beatriz Nascimento's work into English. And the first iteration of that project was just published in January in the journal Antipode. And that was something that myself and my co-authors worked together on for about 2 years, right, everyone? Like the Tony and Archie are here. I think we've been working together for about 2 years. So it's really just so exciting to be able to get to the point where we're launching this project officially and introducing it to the world. And so I actually am gonna pass it over to Archie for him to introduce himself. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, go for it.
So thank you so much for coming, and Kristen and the Center for hosting us. So I'm just to say very briefly who I am. I'm a Leverhulme Early Career Fellow in the Department of Geography at the University of Sheffield in the United Kingdom. And I work on the history of geographical ideas, on political ecology, and on the history of geography as a researcher. And I focus on the intellectual history of the northeast of Brazil. And I first read Beatriz Nascimento's work when I was trying to think through the historical geographies of Recife in the northeast of Brazil, where I was working in the archive of the Recifense geographer, Josué de Castro. And I found that while I was thinking about the history of Recife, that her work provided a way into thinking through the imbrications between space, nature, and liberation in Brazil in a way that nothing else I'd ever read came close to. And I see translation as a kind of key part of my research in general. And I was already translating the Bahian geographer Milton Santos's 1978 book for a new geography. And I thought it was a great loss and sadness that Beatriz's work was not available in English. So back in 2018, I made contact with the journal Antipode about translating Beatriz's work, and they were very supportive right from the beginning, and including through funding. And I'd read Kristen's wonderful writing on Beatriz. It was kind of my first way into navigating Beatriz's project as a whole. So I got in touch with Kristen and through her to Betania, and so our collaboration kind of came together. And it's been a massive privilege for me to work with both Kristen and Betania. And our weekly meetings are a real source of joy in my life. They are the highlight of my week. So I want to thank both of them, as well as Antipode and our panelists today. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Archie. Every time you talk about our weekly meetings, I have to chuckle a little bit because they're the highlight of my week as well. And I'm so glad that we have all been able to come together and work together. Betania.
Hello, hello, hello. Hello, everyone. My name is Betania Nascimento Freitas Gomes. I am the daughter of the queen who is being honored today with her translation, Beatriz Nascimento. This is such an important day to me because back then, when I moved to America for the first time to be a scholarship student at the Dance Theater of Harlem, I had a plan. I had a plan that once I'll become a soloist with the company, I'll bring my mother to the US. And eventually, I dream of her doing some doctorate or some master's degree in some Columbia University, Brown University, even University of Texas. But unfortunately, life took my mother very soon, and I wasn't able to pursue my dream. However, today, I'm doing one of the first steps to pursue my dream. I'm bringing my mother to the English-speaking world. I'm bringing my mother to the diaspora. And I don't have much more to say. This is pretty much it. Well, as I said before, this is one of the first steps to be able to bring my mother to the diaspora, to the African diaspora, to the world, so she can be more recognized, and her words and her legacy can help us move forward for equality, for no racism, and for protection of our people, for the Black people, for the indigenous people, all people who today need to move with hope and look forward to something better. So I hope you enjoy today, and this is it for now.
Thank you, Betania. I'm going to pass it back to Archie because Archie is going to introduce our surprise.
So what we want to do now is show a very beautiful short animation, which we have commissioned to introduce this kind of first stage of the project, to try and reach out to new readers and extra readers, to guide people to these new translations in the journal Antipode. And so we commissioned a short video which includes some extracts from the writing, but also a very beautiful animation. And we want to thank Janaína do Nascimento and her wonderful colleagues Daniela Sevciovic Brito, Joyce Matias, Dani Emiliano, Camila Masri, and Tico Pro in Sao Paulo for producing this. And we hope it will kind of open up the conversation by just giving a sense of some of the texts.
Beatriz Nascimento was one of the most influential intellectuals of Brazil's Black movement between the 1970s and the 1990s. She was a writer, historian, and social critic. Although she only published a limited number of articles before she died, her ideas about quilombos, maroon societies, the Black experience, and Black subjectivity in the Americas were radical and transformative. From Dream. There are cuts and deep cuts on your skin and in your hair, and furrows on your face. They are the ways of the world. They are unreadable maps. In ancient cartography, you need a pirate, good at piracy, who'll bust you out of savagery and put you, once again, in front of the world. Woman.
When I was growing up, my mother had pictures all over her wall. In the middle was a big butterfly. I asked her, "Why a butterfly?" "I'm scared of butterflies," she said. "It's there so I can face my fears." In 1988, 3 months after the centenary of the abolition of slavery in Brazil, I saw that for us to survive this hostile world, we would need, like animals need, to seek out more volatile, weightless, and mysterious routes through life. If we are to have an influence, our own violence, born of resentment, repression, and fruitless desire for revenge, must not merely reproduce the processes that led humanity forward. It would be better then and now for us to be serious, grim, nocturnal, to be sinister, to be vampire. Like them, we do not suck out the sap of power through confrontation, but by moving past the obstacles put in our way by the perverse visage and oppressive regime of the capital. In this country, my life is not power. But that is not the end of it. A rock cannot dismantle the structure of power. The test is not merely to exist, but to make life more beautiful and happier.
To read these and other translations, please access In Front of the World, Translating Beatriz Nascimento by Kristen Smith, Archie Davis, and Betania Gomez.
So I hope you all liked the animation. It was a project of love. And I realized when I introduced myself, I was so busy introducing the series and so busy introducing the project generally that I didn't really say a lot about how I came into the project. And so I'll say 2 seconds worth of background information, just so you all can know where I fit in this as well. Back in 2012, or actually back in 2010, I attended the relaunch of the film Ori, which is an important part of Beatriz Nascimento's intellectual history. It was a film that she helped produce and narrate based on her master's thesis with filmmaker Hatz Gerber. And once I saw that film, I really fell in love with Beatriz Nascimento in a way that I hadn't prior. I had read Alex Hatz's work, and luckily we have Alex here today. I'm so excited for that. I had read Alex Hatz also at Lunchka, which is the first biography and collection of Beatriz Nascimento's work that was published. But it was seeing her face and seeing her speak and feeling her essence that really inspired me to talk more about her and to do more research about her. And so I began writing about her and thinking about how she fits into our conceptions of Black womanhood, Black femininity, and particularly Black women's space in the Americas, right? And Black women's subjectivity. And so I started writing about her and I started researching on her. And out of that, that's how I got to meet Archie. That's how I got to meet Betania. That's how I got to meet Alex. And that's how we came into this project. And this project is part of a broader project that I think is important for us to also mention. And that is the translation is the first step in a translation project. And so it is our hope to actually do a broader translation of her work and publish it as a book. We're working on that now. And we're excited to move into that next phase. And so as we're talking today, we want to think about this within those broader frames, and particularly thinking today about what Beatriz Nascimento's contributions tell us about radical geography and also about transnational feminism, transnational Black feminism. So with that, I'll pass it back to Archie to start our introductions of our panelists.
Thanks, Kristen. So each of us will just introduce one of the three wonderful panelists we have. First, after we've done the introductions, will be Pat Noxolo. Pat is a senior lecturer in human geography at the University of Birmingham. Her research in the UK. Her research brings together the study of international development, culture, and insecurity, and takes a post-colonial approach to the spatialities of a range of Caribbean and British cultural practices. In her recent writing, Pat has worked on theorizing Caribbean security and insecurity, space and Caribbean literature, laughter and materialities, the decolonial city, and much more. She's currently the lead researcher on a new project, which I think has just launched recently, on creative approaches to race and insecurity in the Caribbean and the UK, and is, as well as being chair of the UK Society for the Society for Caribbean Studies, is co-editor of Transactions of Institute of British Geographers and secretary of the race group of the Royal Geographical Society, SIC, in the UK. It's really wonderful to have Pat responding to the texts that we've translated for a number of reasons. I'm an avid reader of her work, and it's really wonderful to have her here. And in particular for her insights on dance, on textuality and embodiment, but also we particularly wanted to get her take to think through the kind of transcontinental dimensions of Beatriz Nascimento's work and how it relates to Caribbean studies. So thank you very much for joining us, Pat.
So I will introduce the next panelist, and that is Alyssa Trotz. And so Alyssa Trotz is professor of Caribbean Studies at New College and director of Women and Gender Studies at the University of Toronto. She is also affiliate faculty at the Dame Nita Barrow Institute of Gender and Development Studies at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill, Barbados. Her research explores social reproduction, neoliberalization, and feminist activisms, coloniality, racial formations, gender difference and violence, transnational migration, and diaspora, She is editor of the anthology, The Point Is to Change the World, Selected Writings by Ndaye, and that was published in 2020. And her current research examines diaspora, indigeneity, and extractivism in colonial Guyana. She is editor of In the Diaspora, a weekly newspaper column in the Guyanese daily Stabroek. And, you know, I'm excited to have Alyssa here today. I think that her work is just absolutely amazing. I met Alyssa on a panel that Deborah Thomas organized a few years ago for the Association for the Study of the Worldwide African Diaspora. And we presented together on that panel. She was presenting on her work on Guyana and extractivism, but also mentioned her work with Ndaye. And I was presenting on Beatriz Nascimento, and we found a lot of resonance in the work that we were doing. And so I'm just excited to have her here today to talk about how this maps onto transnational Black feminism, maps onto Caribbean studies, and maps on to our broader understandings of transnationalism on the left in particular.
Now I am going to introduce, and I cannot introduce him just as an amazing Brazilian scholar, professor, writer, and poet, Alex Hatz. I consider him as a brother. And if I'm here today, it's because of him. Alex was the first one that told me to speak in one of his class, in one of the universities in Rio. I was in a state of shock. He said, Betânia, speak now. And then I spoke in Portuguese. And then he said, now translate. So if I'm here today, it's all his fault. Alex Hatz is an anthropologist, geographer, and professor at the Federal University of Goiás, Brazil. He studies race, gender, class, and space from an intersectional perspective. He's author of Eu Sou Atlântica, a book about Beatriz Nascimento's life and trajectory. He's also the co-editor of Todas as Distâncias, Poemas, Aforismos e Ensaios de Beatriz Nascimento. Salvador, editor Alguns Toques Negros, 2015, an edited collection of Beatriz Nascimento poetry with me, Betânia. Love you, Alex. Te amo.
So thank you so much for that introduction, Betânia. And now we're going to welcome our panelists to give their reflections. And so first up, we will hear from Professor Pat Nosolo.
Okay, hi. I want to thank you so much for inviting me to do this. Two things have, I'm going to try and stick within the 10 minutes. So I'm going to read, which I don't normally do. I'm going to read off my paper just to try and discipline myself a little bit. So two things have surprised me in the run up to this event. The first is that I hadn't heard of Beatriz Nascimento before being invited to do this. And the fact, given that her influence in Brazil is so huge, that I hadn't heard of her in all my education and reading is a small example, I think, of the great barriers and disjunctures in academic knowledge circulation and the ongoing harm that is done through colonial legacies of domination and silencing. I was born and brought up in the UK of Jamaican parents, and in my UK education, I saw very few Black academics. I could have believed that none of us ever did any thinking at all, no Black person around the world, and certainly none from the Americas and none from Africa. And so it's kind of really interesting to me to come across Beatriz's work now in my 50s. The other second surprise for me is how much I am now hearing about Beatriz Nascimento. The Academy is in a moment of refinding this wonderful woman's work, and I'm glad of this. At the same time, I do fear a certain colonization of her fiercely courageous insights, or a tokenism in the discovery, with all the violent knowledge production in that word, of a minority amongst minorities. To use her own language, not only Black, but also Brazilian and also a woman. I'm not saying that about this project at all, of course, but I do think that Beatriz is now coming at me from a number of different directions, and I'm kind of really, I don't trust all the directions from which she's coming at me. So in a world where identity can be a kind of brand, in a tired academy where freshness makes careers, Nascimento might be to some a multifaceted treasure trove to plunder. And I think she would have been critical of that also. So we're in a moment where the politics surrounding the production and circulation of global Black scholarship is fraught. Due to the ongoing effects of racism, it remains so hard for Black scholars to be seen and read as Nascimento seems to have wanted to be seen and read, as, quote, becoming minoritarian, as effectively breaking with her external image, unquote. She says, quote, announcing love me, amo me, molecularly, I am no longer divided between the image of the other and my own desire. Here I want, no, she says, I want, we as Black women need to say that. Here I want to open a parenthesis in the meaning of the micro-political war machine. The racist would never think that hidden in the occult, inside the Black person is affect, though the world outside may be painful and set against them, unquote. And there's a lovely kind of sense in there of you know, we feel that emotion, and that emotion is also denied. So the world hates us and hurts us, and we feel that emotion. And there's a terrible kind of tension in there that she encapsulates beautifully. So in watching her film, Ori, for the first time, and in reading the examples of her work that Kristin, Archie, and Betânia included in their special issue in Antipode, what strikes me most is her upfronting of affect, of emotion, and her courageous contention with difference and power, without resolving difference and power into resistance alone. So she begins, for example, her work for a new existential and physical territory with the bold search for, quote, more volatile, weightless, and mysterious routes through life that go far beyond, unquote, that go far beyond just not being white, not being male, or even not being colonized. She goes so far as to say, quote, I believe up to now, we have not understood or practiced our difference. Worse, we have not respected it, unquote. Her film does exactly this. It practices and respects Black culture as volatile, weightless, and mysterious. Carefully working through the suffering and relationships that come out of our many transatlantic journeys, Ori makes full use of the power of film to edit across difference, to connect and contrast, to bring sound, music, words, and images together, to bring together multiple narrative voices and styles in unpredictable ways, without any weighty concern with coherent narrative, without having always to explain or understand, with an emphasis on feeling and engaging. Yes, she does theorize from start to finish. There's no binary between thought and feeling in the film. Sometimes she speaks in formal academic settings, sometimes in informal conversations, sometimes in poetry. At the same time, she also gives space to many others to theorize, to demonstrate, to disagree with each other, and most of all, to move their bodies, to dance to a wide range of Black music in highly choreographed ways, but also in free and mysterious ways, sometimes relying on and sometimes defying their body's own materiality. I can see lots of connections with my own work as a cultural geographer concerned with the Caribbean and with Black British geographies, and that has fascinated me. I'm very interested in dance and Black embodiment, so the film moves me in very many ways. But I was particularly interested in these, quote, more volatile, weightless, and mysterious routes through life, unquote, that Nascimento sees as what we as Black people need to survive the world, as we are located or even dislocated within it. In my current project, Carry Cook, which stands for Creative Approaches to Race and Insecurity in the Caribbean and the UK, I had the great pleasure of collaborating with a number of Caribbean heritage artists to think about race and the relationships between security and insecurity. So I'm going to try and share screen for a second here. Okay, so the most striking of these collaborations is an original installation by Sonia E. Barrett, which feels to me like a really accurate illustration of Nascimento's words. Sonia got together what she calls a maplective of Black women, myself included, who shredded and then plaited together some maps of Africa, the Caribbean, the UK, and the US. Then she wove the plaits, or we wove the plaits, she wove the plaits rather into this beautifully molten shape, meandering across the rigidly colonial columns and portraits of the Royal Geographical Society's map room in London. Apart from the apparent weightlessness and fractal mysteriousness of the artwork, moving elementally like smoke or waves across the space, what resonates with Nascimento's work for me is the generous dialogue that the artwork sets up with this space as difference. As Nascimento suggests, this is not a binary or policed rejection of a space that nonetheless still carries the traces of violences against the kinds of Black bodies that were sitting in the space plaiting. Apart from it, from anything else, there is a portrait of Captain Cook here, that's one of the images. So generously, the artwork includes plaques by staff of the Royal Geographical Society, as well as the maplective. It works with maps, not rejecting them, but plaiting, weaving, and fiercely interrogating them. And it artfully interacts with the curves and arches of the room itself, pointing the way forward to another kind of space, another set of possibilities. In this sense, we might think of Sonia E. Barrett's installation as what Nascimento calls, quote, becoming utopian, unquote, pushing towards another system, the rooted fluidity and territorialized freedom that Nascimento so beautifully describes in the Quilombola. I left that word to the end because I wasn't sure how to say. Quilombola, that's close enough. So thank you very much. Thank you so much for inviting me to do this and for giving me the opportunity to look at Beatriz's work. So beautiful. And I wish I'd seen it back when I was 18 and needing to see a Black woman doing such beautiful work. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Pat, for that wonderful reflection. I think we'll pass straight on to Alyssa now, and then we'll bring together questions after the three presentations.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm just not sure of my network connection. Hopefully it works. Thank you. It's a great honor to be here. And I really wanted to thank Bethania, Kristen, and Archie for inviting me to be part of this discussion. I have so many thoughts about this remarkable translation of the work of Beatriz Nascimento that they have gifted to us. And like Pat, I actually was not aware of Beatriz Nascimento until I encountered Kristen at that conference and heard her speak and went back and found this Meridians essay of 2016, which I wish I had known of then because my other mother was still alive. And this is an essay that I know that she would have loved to read. And unfortunately, I have not yet seen or read. What I want to offer today are just a few provisional reflections or provocations. I'm really interested in hearing from the editors during the discussion, and as well as from Alex Hatz, who follows me. So let me begin with a caveat. It's a bit of an emotional time for me. And so I'm going to ask you to be a bit patient today. I arrived in Guyana from Toronto, Canada, a few days ago. And it brought a sharp and new valence to my encounter on this terrain with this text. In ways I'm not yet sure I can really put my finger upon. It feels just too raw and too new. I'm not even sure why I found this surprising. I guess intellectually, I perhaps understood the difference that geography makes. But it's one thing to say that and another to return home, Pat was just speaking about affect, and to feel one's different locatedness. There are whole sections of Georgetown, the capital city, where supermarkets stock Brazilian goods, where bars carry Brazilian television stations. I watched the 2014 FIFA World Cup on the outdoor patio of a Brazilian restaurant in Guyana. Everything was green and yellow. And where, at least before COVID-19 supposedly closed the border due to the variants wreaking havoc next door, buses are loaded with people and goods bound for the 10 to 11 hour overland journey to Lethem, the Guyanese town at the border with Brazil. The crossing over the Takatu River takes you to Bonfim. I'm told that many Guyanese have houses there, from where you can catch buses to Boa Vista and Manaus. Indigenous languages and nations on the Guyanese side are mainly Makushi, Wapichan, and in the very deep south, Wai. We can also add Creole. This is a tense zone of transit for others too, like Haitians, yes, Haitians, trying to make their way to and through Brazil without being stopped, harassed, jailed, deported by border guards on either side. As I speak right now, several women and women's organizations in Guyana are advocating around a Haitian couple that was arrested on the Brazilian-Guyanese border and was jailed for a year. This is my Guyana that defines itself primarily as Caribbean, but where I am stopped by this text to contemplate the borders we share, not just with Brazil, but also with Suriname, Venezuela, and the different kinds of conversations this can, should, must necessitate. It feels like, I don't know, a dissonance in these worlds we inhabit, the worlds of the academy dominated by the hegemony of Anglophone scholarship that renders the Black lives of women warrior activists like Beatriz Nascimento illegible, and the fluid, multilingual world of the border towns where people know or learn what they need to know to move, to survive, to relate. How are we kept from each other by these border infrastructures of colonial geography that are imposed and maintained and used to divide? And who is it that does not know? If, as the editors underscore, Nascimento challenges us to rethink space and territoriality, perhaps one place to begin is with the decentering or decolonizing of these colonial borders, living remnants of different empires, dividing us from each other and ourselves, mapping these other circuits of exchange that foreground South-South encounters, diasporic and indigenous encounters, circuits that are not first mediated via the Western Academy, At the front of which worlds, we might ask? Reading Nascimento in Guyana also takes me, therefore, to the posthumously published anthology, The Point is to Change the World, of Andai, Guyanese social activist, a text that I was privileged to edit with her before her death in 2019, and that I'm so delighted is now being translated, I think by Edición Funilario, into Portuguese for a Brazilian audience. I'm struck, again, I ask, why the surprise, by the resonances. Kristen talked about resonances. There are so many, but to name just a few that I gleaned. Both women organized politically against dictatorial regimes in Brazil and Guyana in the 1970s and 1980s, neighbors. Alongside Nascimento's involvement in Brazil's Black movement, we find Andai's untiring efforts to forge multiracial unity among working peoples in Guyana as an African Guyanese woman, reflected in her refusal of her heteropatriarchal Eurocentric given names and the single Swahili name she took, which means daughter comes home, neighbors. They both worked across genre and register, the speech, the poem, the essay, the magazine entry, the images that Bethania referenced on the walls of her childhood home in her introduction. So much across genre and register that Andai refused the language of chapters for her anthologies as too restrictive and capitulating to the benchmark of institutional recognition to which she would never be answerable, neighbors. This goes beyond the task of assembling a written archive, as the editors of this special issue comment, and this also applies to Andai, quote, Nascimento's praxis beyond writing was just as, or perhaps more significant than her textual production. So it raises my first question. How do you bring the fullness, the multivalence, the 360-degree turn of this work, this praxis, and I would say language is the product and producer of action. How do you bring this to the surface? And a crucial related question that comes from the observation that Nascimento, quote, distanced herself from feminism during her lifetime, quote, in the context of the whiteness of Brazilian feminism. And, you know, there's a wonderful section in that, I think it's the second essay where she maps these transnational itineraries of Black power, and specifically John Carlos and the Black Power Fist at the 1968 Olympics, which inspires her to, as she says, quote, abandon all my bourgeois projects, end quote. And in the Caribbean, Andai also refused to refer to herself as feminist, describing herself as alienated from a feminism that prioritize, quote, the interests of women who are better off, more formally educated, in other words, who have more social, economic, and cultural power, end quote. What does it mean? I guess it's a question to the editors, to myself, that we position them within a genealogy of transnational Black radical feminist thought. This disciplined refusal of binaries, of the artifice of separation, is articulated through the principle of quilombo, as noun, adjective, and verb, as space, as orientation, disposition, living practice, as being and becoming. Multi-sided territorialization without, therefore, as Toni Morrison said, a mandate for conquest. Myth and memory retold until they unfold into historical and contemporary sites of fugitivity that proliferate across Black space, the community, the favela, the dance hall. For Nascimento, we see this especially in the movement across secular and sacred, in her articulation of quilombo as, quote, located first in the corporeality of the body, end quote, offering transcendence and transatlantic connection across the Americas and Africa, tracking the Black diaspora across space and time. And we can put this in conversation with the sudden illumination that came to the late Barbadian poet and writer Kamau Braffett, as he described, quote, in conversations with the African-American poet and musician Nathaniel Mackey, as the image of an old woman sweeping the sand from her yard very early in the morning, end quote. I think it was on the island of Jamaica. Braffett gives this the name of tidalectics, not dialectics, because it refuses teleological progress models and colonial time and segregated space, and offers in its place a different Caribbean origin story that connects sand to sea from shore to shore in the performance of this daily domestic ritual. We see that Nascimento's reading of quilombo lets us stay with the figure of this woman, her reading of quilombo as corporeal, as located in the shape and sway and shudder of the body, quote, as home, not dislocation, end quote, as an ever-changing continuum. It allows us to contemplate, as Jackie Alexander suggests, the embodied labor of Black women that makes the sacred and all of her connection to living things intelligible, sacred work, or to draw on Audre Lorde, erotic work. On the one hand, I'm coming to the end, the heroism, the at times larger than life story, or the larger than life way the story is told of Quilombo, of Maroons, of Palmares, the Garifuna, Zumbi, Nanny. On the other hand, or perhaps at the same time, the old woman in Kamau Braffett's telling of dialectics is illuminating. She makes us pause because of her age, her very ordinariness, the seemingly domestic and daily ritual of work that she performs. I thought of this woman when I read Nascimento's poem, Black Danger, miracle of nightfall, dark and invisible, myth, not glory, no bats, make history. And Bethania's story as well brings me to this final point I want to make, her story of her mom's fear of the butterfly and having it on the wall because you need to face that fear. That also brings to mind Audre Lorde's discussion of how your fear will never protect you. So my last provocation, I suppose, to Bethania, Kristen, Archie, and Alex, but to the editors who describe Nascimento as engaged in, quote, an embodied intellectual and political project, which was lived as struggle and contingency, end quote, for whom Quilombo was, quote, living practice, organic Black political model for liberation, end quote. I'd love to hear you say a bit more about what you meant by contingency. And I got a glimpse of that when Bethania spoke about the butterfly and fear. So let me open this up by closing with a poem by the Jamaican artist, academic, activist, and friend of mine, Anna Ford Smith, about Nanny, Maroon leader, rebel woman from Jamaica, reputed to shoot bullets from the cheeks of her ass at the enemy, storied in this poem, not as a singular leader, sure of her purpose, but rather as a channel of her community's aspirations. They write so much about me now that sometimes I read about myself, hoping for strength, while I wait among the piles of empty shoes, the still Kisco carts and the mad warriors in the sidewalk market at Halfway Tree. I never recognized the woman that they describe. Let me tell you how it really was. My body shook in battle and I vomited after seeing dead. At first, the smell of blood made me faint. Blinded by a future I could not vision, my old words meaningless, choked to silence in a forest of trees I had no name for. I fell and fell, was lost, bled, marooned in a landscape that grew stranger with each discovery I made. Once for hours I climbed that cracked, crumbling black rock, till hunched up and hungry I could stare down at the oceans of cane, bound by the sunlit grid of straight roads, and study the repetitious movements of slaves. Tied as I am to the treadmill of change, I envied them obedience is freedom. I hungered for their assured meals, their chance to confuse imitation with innovation, to trace all evil to one source outside themselves. At times like that, I cursed the people they say I led. When the abeng blew, I longed for lovers or children or invented dreams to fill the hollow, sleepless nights. The pumpkin seeds that overnight bore fruit to feed us was one. The bullets that I caught between my legs and threw back at the enemy was another. I told the others these dreams. They repeated them. In their believing, I believed myself. That was all I had to hold against surrender, to hold against the defeat that would make me visible in their history. And I wanted that. I was that vain. How I prayed to be free from what drove me on. They never mentioned that, or how close courage is to fear. It was terror of terror that drove me on till it was all over. And I heard I was nigh, eye of change, leadress, pathfinder, healer of the breach. Thank you so much for inviting me here.
Thank you so very much, Alyssa, for that beautiful reflection. We just want to say a special thank you to you, because I know that this is a tough moment. And so thank you. That was beautiful. We now want to invite Alex Hatz to give his reflections. Eu vou me traduzir. Alex, a gente está convidando você para a mesa para apresentar as suas reflexões. Slow down, yes. And just so everyone knows, the interpreters are asking that we slow down a little bit. And sorry that I didn't see that before. And so hopefully we can just remember that as we're also talking. Alex?
I don't think we can hear Alex.
Yeah, I don't hear Alex. Is he on the right channel?
Alex, não dá para te ouvir, meu amor.
Nem ver.
Obrigada.
Eu nem tô vendo o Alex, peraí.
Zoom is muted.
Yeah. Alex, você tá no mudo. Hold on, everyone. I think he's having some technical difficulties. There it goes, Alex. Aí, ó.
Alô?
Agora sim.
Eu quero primeiramente agradecer o convite, né, feito para esta mesa redonda por Betânia Nascimento, que considero também minha irmã, Kristen Smith, uma amiga, e Art Davis. Quero também parabenizar a tradução, que é...
Só um minutinho,
Alô?
Alex. Eu vou só falar uma coisinha que eu esqueci de falar, desculpa. For everybody who needs Portuguese translation, if you click the interpretation button at the bottom, then you can change your audio input so that you can hear Alex translated into English. Thank you. Desculpa, Alex. Pode continuar.
Tranquilo. E eu quero parabenizar a Betânia, Kristen e Art pela tradução, né, que era um sonho, porque Beatriz é uma mulher da diáspora, né, e precisa ser conhecida cada vez mais longe, né, pelo que a gente já ouviu hoje. Eu vou falar um pouco da minha pesquisa, né, com a trajetória e a obra dela, no meu percurso de militante, antropólogo e geógrafo, de forma resumida, e de algumas concepções que eu encontro no trabalho de Beatriz Nascimento, né? No Brasil dos anos 70, em várias cidades, ainda durante o governo militar, o movimento negro começou a se reorganizar, né? E alguns dos participantes eram intelectuais ativistas, como Beatriz Nascimento. Na década seguinte, nos anos 80, o movimento cresceu muito e conquistou alguns espaços políticos e sociais. No entanto, ainda não sei bem a razão, né? Nos anos 90, quando eu começo a fazer o meu mestrado e depois o doutorado, nas universidades, com o corpo docente quase todo branco, poucos estudantes negros, autores negros não eram lidos, eram apagados ou esquecidos dos circuitos acadêmicos, né? Dos encontros, dos livros e das revistas, né? Então, né, como as colegas falaram, não leram Beatriz Nascimento, no Brasil também nós não lemos Beatriz Nascimento, né? Pessoas de pouco mais de 50 anos, como eu, não leram Beatriz Nascimento. Muito raramente. Pessoas mais jovens, menos ainda. E na bibliografia dessa década, mesmo sobre quilombos, né, não há quase nenhuma citação do trabalho de Beatriz Nascimento. Eu tenho algumas hipóteses para isso, mas não posso explicar agora. Quem manteve a memória de autoras como Beatriz Nascimento e Lélia Gonzalez foi a militância negra e feminista, né? Uma parte dela acadêmica. Eu tive contato com ativistas, familiares e amigos e decidi fazer a pesquisa, né, que resultou no livro Eu Sou Atlântica. Eu sabia que ela estudava quilombos. Na minha tese, trabalhei com alguns textos de Beatriz Nascimento, mas eu fui conhecendo seus estudos sobre a questão racial, a mulher negra, a cultura negra e a diáspora africana, né? Os quilombos não eram só um fenômeno do passado, né? E isso ela trazia com muito vigor. E a questão racial, que era um tema proibido pelo governo militar, ela foi uma das que mais trabalhou essa temática, né? Inclusive foi marcada pela ditadura militar, né? Eu republiquei 8 ensaios e percebi que, aos poucos, né, a antiga e a nova militância foram recuperando contato com a Beatriz Nascimento. Nos anos 2000, nós tivemos a adoção de ações afirmativas, e isso fez com que mais, né, universitários negros se interessassem pelo trabalho de Beatriz Nascimento. Depois eu fiz a coletânea de poemas com Betânia, e, de novo, os temas, né, estavam ali naqueles poemas, naqueles ensaios: os quilombos, a mulher negra, o racismo e a diáspora. No Brasil, eu posso dizer que o pensamento das mulheres negras ainda não é devidamente reconhecido na universidade. Pelo retorno que eu recebo, sobretudo de mulheres negras, falando dos livros, Beatriz Nascimento tem se tornado muito mais conhecida, especialmente pelos seus textos e por suas falas e imagens no filme Ori, né? E seu trabalho tem sido estudado um pouco mais nas áreas de história, antropologia, geografia, cinema e literatura. Nos circuitos acadêmicos dos anos 70, né, Beatriz já tinha alguns ensaios, algumas entrevistas para revistas de circulação nacional, sendo uma das mulheres de maior projeção da sua época, entre mulheres brancas e mulheres negras. Quando ela faz a conferência sobre o quilombo, que aparece no filme, ela já é uma mulher com mais de 10 trabalhos feitos, né? 8 resenhas, ensaios e 2 entrevistas. Poucas mulheres tinham a projeção que ela teve naquela época. Sua formação é basicamente em história, mas ela era uma crítica das fronteiras duras entre as disciplinas. Nos primeiros ensaios, ela propõe fazer uma história negra, aproximando a historiografia, dados sociológicos e a interpretação antropológica, né? Eu posso dizer também que ela tinha um pensamento geográfico importante para a compreensão da diáspora negra em várias escalas, do corpo ao mundo. Ela trabalhou algumas noções espaciais muito importantes para a compreensão das relações raciais das culturas negras da diáspora africana. Primeira, o quilombo. Além de estudar os quilombos como uma sociedade alternativa negra organizada durante a escravidão, ela estudou o quilombo militar africano da região Congo e Angola, e foi uma das intelectuais ativistas que contribuíram para tornar o quilombo um símbolo de liberdade para a população negra e o movimento negro. O território. A partir dos estudos dos quilombos, das práticas de fugas e da busca por um lugar no espaço colonial, Beatriz Nascimento foi elaborando a noção de território, que pode ser denominado de território negro, que compreende lugares próprios ou específicos, como apontava o teórico Muniz Sodré, que foi seu orientador do segundo mestrado. No filme Ori, da diretora Raquel Gerber, ela contribuiu com a pesquisa, textos e narração, e nele se encontra uma de suas teses. Ela que diz: a minha tese está no filme Ori, né? Então, o filme contém uma tese, né? Por isso que tem esse conteúdo de ser teórico e também poético, né? Quais suas teses sobre o corpo, né? O corpo mapa, né? O corpo cartografia, o corpo que traz uma geografia antiga, histórica, o corpo documento, o corpo que é reflexo de um outro corpo negro, né? Esse corpo negro em transmigração, em grandes movimentos, né, migratórios, e transatlanticidade no grande movimento atlântico, que se relaciona com o quilombo, por sua vez, com o terreiro, né, o espaço sagrado negro, com a escola de samba e com o movimento negro. Essa é uma tese completamente inovadora, né? Até hoje. É necessário dizer que Beatriz Nascimento também é uma autora crítica da colonização e do colonialismo cultural e uma das formuladoras de um pensamento negro descolonial, na mesma linhagem de Aimé Césaire, Frantz Fanon, Abdias Nascimento e Lélia Gonzalez. Mais uma vez agradeço, estou muito emocionado de estar aqui, né? E agradeço às pessoas todas que estão assistindo. Um abraço.
Alex, a gente está muito feliz com sua presença. Estamos completamente honradas e honrados e honrades com sua presença, porque você inspirou esse trabalho todo. Então, temos que agradecer a sua visão, a sua pesquisa, a sua dedicação a mostrar a obra de Beatriz Nascimento, Dona Beatriz Nascimento, para o mundo. Então, a gente também ficou muito emocionado aqui, mas vamos tentar andar pela frente. I was just saying to Alex, well, it was interpreted, but I was just saying that we were just thanking him. And now we're at the point where we're opening up for discussion. And I know that the panelists posed some questions for us. And so I want to invite my fellow co-authors, as people are formulating their questions for everyone on the panel, including ourselves, to maybe offer some responses to some of the provocations, which were brilliant and amazing. And so thank you to Pat, Alyssa, and Alex for your provocations and your insights. I think that, I don't know who would like to go first, but, or do you want to kind of think through things first? There's one question that, Alyssa, you put forth about the tension between situating Beatriz Nascimento within transnational Black feminism and her insistence on not being feminist. And I think if there's one thing that comes out a lot in our conversations as we continue to translate her work and talk about how we want to situate her work, that comes up a lot. And I think that Alex helped us to really understand where that's coming from historically, because it is the Black feminist movement in Brazil that brought the world's attention to her work through their archival project of paying attention to Black women's intellectual contributions. And so I think that there, on the one hand, there's that historical precedent of the fact that she was not only very much in dialogue with the foundational Black feminists of the Black feminist movement in Brazil, but much of her writing contributes to that thinking, despite the fact that she's rejecting feminism. And so in my, and I'm always, and I don't have a definitive answer on this because I go back and forth. I have a tension with it. I'm not gonna lie to you. I definitely have a tension with it because on the one hand, she's very adamant about not wanting to be associated with feminism. On the other hand, she is in line with folk like Lélia Gonzalez and Sueli Carneiro, who have made very strong critiques of feminism, while also saying that is why we need Black feminism. And so I wonder how she would situate herself today, given the way that Black feminism has taken up its own set of intellectual affirmations in Brazil in a way that's very specific, not only to Black women, but also to Brazil's context. And I also, you know, and I also, and I won't belabor the point, but I also think we need to kind of think through these things and query them. And that's something that we talk about a lot. We talk about it a lot and we go back and forth on it a lot. And so I really appreciate the question. And it reminds us that we have to just continue to question why we're making certain decisions. I think there's one text that we're translating for the broader book project that we didn't translate for this, that was the text, and correct me if I'm wrong, Betania and Archie, was the text where we started to say, she's got a lot to say about gender, sexuality, and intersectionality and race. And that is one, Mulher Negra e o Mercado de Trabalho, Black Woman in the Workplace. And the other was her autobiographical essay, Maria Beatriz Nascimento, which is so sharp when it comes to a feminist critique, and particularly a Black feminist critique, because I think we can't collapse those, and we have to be really careful to not collapse those, especially within the context of Brazil, where Black feminism is a very clear intellectual tradition and tradition of organizing and politics, right? So that's one of the things that I think inspires us to do that, but you remind us, as always, we have to keep questioning that.
I would just to add one thing to that, and I think this is also why it's so interesting and important to have to work with Betania on her mother's work, is that I think that we find throughout Beatriz's often dispersed and fragmentary work, because there is a good proportion of stuff which is published, and she was intervening in these debates in a very public way, but there's also a body of writing which is unpublished. And there are some really interesting and incredibly beautiful reflections on her own sense of herself as in a lineage of Black women thinking. And that's kind of familial, but it's also this kind of this sense of an inheritance of a tradition which she doesn't always have access to in a textual way, but that she's kind of writing through her, writing into her own work as a kind of transgenerational idea in her writing about Black women in Brazil in particular.
I definitely want to remind everybody that you can just type your questions into the chat, or you can raise your hand like our illustrious panelists just did. And so we'll go to, Pat, if you want to go ahead and speak, and then we'll go to the other folk who have raised their hands.
Okay, I just wanted to make a quick point, because this did, it kind of disturbed me a little bit as I was reading the, I was reading the collection. It's a great collection, and really interesting kind of ideas come through, and I wouldn't be able to access Beatriz's work unless you had done that translation. So absolutely very grateful for that. But it did, there is a whole movement at the moment, a kind of disciplining, a post hoc disciplining of people, not just in terms of feminism, but also in terms of geography, right? And you know, I can see from what Alex said that she does come from she has got that training. There's a history of geography kind of training in there, so it's not entirely kind of arbitrary or anything, and you can see the spatial in her work. And yet, from my position and location in the UK, I can see the history of coloniality of geography. It's a hugely post-colonial discipline that still hasn't really got its head around the destruction that it's done, and there's an ongoing destruction, right? It's not just about the past, it's about, you know, relationships with Shell and all sorts of other kind of capitalist relationships. So there's a lot in the discipline of geography that I think Beatriz's work is rightly critical of. And there is a kind of moment where, because the discipline hasn't been encouraging Black thought or really collaborating with Black thought, it now is very keen to co-opt Black thought and to call people geographers. And there's a positive side to that. There's a really excellent politics that's about recognizing that the discipline did exclude people, and those people would have been or could have been in geography if geography had been more open. But on the other hand, there could be an erasure of history by saying now that those people are geographers when it wasn't open to those people before. And Beatriz is one of those. When I was reading her and watching Ori, I was thinking how incredibly undisciplined, you know, she is, how incredibly outside of those boundaries she is. And yeah, I think it's a discussion to keep open because I think her work is incredibly open.
Definitely. I appreciate, I know Archie wants to say something. I appreciate the fact that you mentioned undisciplined, and Alex mentioned undisciplined as well. And I think that really quickly, I just want to say that part of what you're tapping into is the political challenge of translation. Not just in the linguistic sense, but of translating our lives and our experiences so that they can be legible to others. I think that there's always a violence and a colonial violence that's embedded in that process, particularly when it's occurring within the academy and within universities. I think that it is something that we all have to be constantly attentive of. And what I appreciate about your critique and your comment is that you're reminding us, don't forget that we cannot become comfortable with this, right? We cannot allow ourselves to become comfortable with her being either a historian or a geographer or a feminist or whomever, right? We have to constantly remind ourselves that she pushed back against all of those categorizations and that she was undisciplined. And despite the university's insistence on us making somebody legible by telling them where they fit, right? So I just wanted to say that. Archie, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to really ask Alex if he could kind of say something more about that in Brazil, because my understanding of the history of Brazilian geography is that she was not a geographer, and she in many ways couldn't have been a geographer in Brazil. And that although there is a wonderful history of critical thinking in geography in Brazil, it's of a very different and also very disciplinarian sort. So as I mentioned, I've translated Milton Santos's work, which is an extraordinary oeuvre of work, but it is a particular vision of a critical Marxist geography, which doesn't have space for Beatriz. So, but I was really wanting to ask Alex to say more about that.
Eu posso falar. Bom, Arte, não, de fato, ela não seria geógrafa, né? E também o Milton Santos, que tem alguns textos sobre a questão racial e tem um relato de viagem à África, esses são textos não geográficos de Milton Santos. Né? O livro Marianne em preto e branco não é um livro geográfico, é um livro que não é citado como geográfico, porque é apenas um relato de viagem, né? Sendo que não existe geografia sem viajantes, né? Não existe geografia sem viajantes, né? O que eu faço, algumas pessoas com quem eu trabalho fazem, é dizer que Beatriz tem um pensamento geográfico, um pensamento espacial. Pensamento geográfico é uma ideia de um professor que já faleceu, foi meu orientador. Então, nós dizemos isso porque os intelectuais negros têm um pensamento geográfico. Pensam diáspora, pensam quilombo, pensam lugar de negro, como Lélia Gonzalez. Então, esses pensadores negros e negras têm um pensamento geográfico, mas não um pensamento geográfico acadêmico e da disciplina, né? É uma outra coisa, somos nós que estamos trazendo esse pensamento para dentro dos trabalhos, das teses, assim, né? E não somos aceitos.
Obrigada, Alex. Eu acho que isso é fantástico. A ideia de pensamentos geográficos que recusa a questão da disciplinaridade, né? we have one question that came up, and I would ask that Luana Hayes, if you could ask your question, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for this amazing panel. And I'm very glad that the work of Beatriz Nascimento is being translated into English, because now I'm working on my dissertation and she is the main framework of my articulation of Quilombo. I'm working with the female leadership in Maroon communities, and I'm working with this relationship of Beatriz Nascimento's definition of Quilombo. So my question would be in that direction, to think about the contributions of Beatriz Nascimento to the rethinking of Quilombo and Quilombismo, because many literature that we encounter the discussion about Quilombo, it's still very focused on the aspect of fugitivity and the connection to the mountains and this location, this particular locations related to the idea of Quilombo. And Beatriz Nascimento brings this resignification of these spaces, the idea of Quilombo. And some authors even consider the idea of Quilombo and Quilombismo a limited frame to think about Black freedom because of this connection to the aspect of the fugitivity, to limit the idea of Quilombo to fugitivity. So I would like you to discuss a little bit about Beatriz's contributions to the rethinking of Quilombo and Quilombismo, and also to think about a connection with poetry, because my work is in literature, and I'm connecting poetry and Quilombismo, and how poetry can also be seen as a territory, as a space of freedom, of Black liberation, of Black freedom. And Beatriz Nascimento also being a poet, and her work as a poet is also, I think, very connected to her articulation of the idea of Quilombo. So if you could talk a little bit about this connection of poetry and Quilombo and Beatriz Nascimento. And my last comment, it would be about, I'm discussing Beatriz Nascimento's connection as an idea of Quilombismo to other Black women intellectuals in the diaspora. For example, Sylvia Wynter, in her work on the Black Metamorphosis, the idea of maroonage, that she brings that I think it really dialogues what Beatriz is doing to this idea of the Quilombo as space of creation. So if you have any other recommendations of other Black women thinkers in the diaspora that has been working with Quilombo in this direction of Quilombo as the space of creation, the space of being. And I appreciate Alyssa and Hatz for bringing this reference for the poets and the artists as well. So thank you a lot for your contributions, and thank you for this amazing work that you are doing and for this discussion here. Thank you so much.
Alex, você queria responder a primeira pergunta sobre como ela reinterpreta ou muda nosso entendimento do conceito de Quilombo? E depois a gente pode também abrir, pode ser?
Sim, sim. O Beatriz tem vários sentidos de Quilombo, mas é como se fosse uma experimentação teórica, mas muito coerente. Vai depender do que ela está estudando, se são os quilombos, se é Palmares, se é depois de Palmares, se é o quilombo africano. Então é preciso saber, e ela diz, os quilombos mudam dependendo da região e da época no Brasil, né? Isso ela estava absolutamente certa, e isso nós concordamos hoje. Então não temos uma forma quilombo só, né? Mas o que eu tenho visto nela, e gosto muito que está no filme, é que não é só fugir. Ela fala de fuga, ela fala de momentos de paz quilombola, que é uma coisa que poucas pessoas falavam da paz quilombola, né, dos momentos que os quilombos também negociavam, mas ela fala de uma busca, né? O que esse fugitivo está buscando no espaço colonial, né? Então, eu acho que uma das perguntas dela é essa, né? Construir o quê? É construir que espaço o quilombola constrói, né? No século XX, ela vai dizer, é a favela que ele constrói, mas e antes? Então, assim, eu penso que ela tinha essa dúvida, né? Essas questões, que não era uma questão simples para a época, né? Que acho que até hoje não é fácil responder, e nisso ela tinha um sonho de liberdade, sim, né? Negra, que ela vai dizer isso, a Beatriz vai dizer isso, Beatriz do Nascimento, mas eu escrevi até um pequeno poema que eu digo assim, eu fujo, eu busco, né? Buscamos o quê, enquanto pessoas negras, num espaço que continua sendo colonizado, né? Numa universidade que continua sendo colonizada, formar quilombos, né? E que quilombos? Então, assim, eu acho que ela era muito fértil nessas perguntas e não necessariamente com respostas.
Adorei, Alex. A Alyssa também tem uma outra pergunta, e é uma pergunta que eu acho que você pode responder rapidinho, que é por que Beatriz Nascimento não está incluída no discurso acadêmico sobre quilombo dentro do Brasil?
Para mim?
Sim, senhor. Se o senhor...
Ah. Então, porque era considerada muito militante. Na academia dos anos 80 e 90, eu fiz a graduação e depois mestrado, doutorado. Nessa época, éramos criticados por sermos muito militantes e que nossos trabalhos não eram muito sérios, né? E então ela teria um discurso muito militante para a época e inclusive alguns antropólogos até da Universidade de São Paulo eram muito contrários a esse discurso militante sobre o quilombo, né? Havia esse confronto, mas é um confronto não estabelecido, né? E aí o que aconteceu foi que esses antropólogos e outros historiadores vão assumindo o lugar de fala sobre quilombo, né, no Brasil, nas revistas, nos livros, nos jornais, inclusive no centenário da abolição, e os intelectuais negros são retirados de cena, né? É incrível ver isso na Folha de São Paulo, ver isso no estado de São Paulo, como a partir de 1988 não há mais falas de Lélia Gonzalez, de Beatriz ou de Beatriz Nascimento.
Desculpa, gente, eu estava respondendo no chat. I was responding some things in the chat, and so sorry about that. One thing I want to also add, and thank you, Alex. One thing that I wanted to add to that, because we're also trying to loop in some of the questions that our panelists asked us as the co-authors and the editors of the translation. Part of what, and Alyssa, you mentioned the quote, talking about the embodied intellectual and political project lived as struggle and contingency. What Alex just mentioned about the ways that the Academy in Brazil has excluded Black women's voices historically because they have labeled those voices as exclusively militante or exclusively political, right? It's about political activism and not about scholarship. In a lot of ways, that's the kind of contingency that we're talking about. It's almost as if she's constantly teetering between engaging with the Academy and disrupting and dismantling it, and always on the edge. And I think that if there's one way to describe Beatriz Nascimento, she's always in a point of struggle. A lot of her work talks about her own engagement with psychoanalysis, about her having multiple psychoanalysts in her life. And so she talks about that very openly in her writing and talks about this kind of existential and ontological struggle that she's grappling with. And I think that that's what we mean by embodied contingency. It's like she's unresolved. And that is who she is. And I think Alex just mentioned, I'll give you some responses, but they won't be complete answers. And I think that to me sums up a lot of the way Beatriz Nascimento operates. She gives you some responses, but she never gives you complete answers, either because she is finishing her thoughts, or because she wants you to be, she wants you to make you think at the end of it? I know, Archie, you said you wanted to say something on contingency as well. Do you want to step in and make a comment?
I wanted to come back to the question on poetry, so I'll pass over to Betania in just a second, but just to respond to that. And I think there's some things that Pat was saying as well. One of the things that is so interesting in working through the longer project, which hopefully will be all available to everybody soon, and is available in some really important collections, as well as Alexa's work in Portuguese, is there's a really interesting relationship between what she did publish and what she didn't publish, I think, which I've only just started to sort of think through a little bit, but we've started to think through a little bit, but there's that contingency, I think, plays out across that gap between what she put into public debates and what, for whatever reasons, which are often invisible in the archive, I guess, she didn't publish or were kind of personal. But then I think that links to the poetry as well, and so because that provides her with a different kind of voice. So Betania, do you want to say something about the poetry?
For Luana's question about the poetry, I have a very close relationship with my mother's poetry, much more than her academic work. Once my mother was having a crisis, issues with the academic world, I was very close to my mom in conversations, even I was very young, about channel her feelings and express herself in an artistic way. Because I'm an artist, I had difficulties assessing the academia. And I'm definitely not an academic. As you can tell, I'm very quiet right here. And I'm listening. And in a way, this journey has been amazing because I get to know about my mother every other discussion. And it's really great. But when it comes to poetry, it is a very close relationship between me and my mother, between me as an artist and Beatriz as an artist, as a poet. Beatriz used to play acoustic guitar and sing with my father. Then she played acoustic guitar and sing with her second partner, Roberto Rosenberg. And then at some point, my mother stopped playing the guitar, the acoustic guitar, and singing. And I noticed that, and I had a conversation with her. Why don't you write poetry? Because I saw some of them. And I think you should channel, you should let it out through the poetry. Besides, I will understand you better. I want to bring here that to be her curator and to be the one who protects her legacy is because our relationship was not just mother and daughter, we had a great friendship. And that's what made my mother keep writing poetry. It was for us to understand each other more. It was for me to understand the struggle in my way. And it was for us to be always together. Ooh, I didn't want to break it down, but and that's why when Alex brought Eu Sou Atlântica, I went to him and I said, I want to make my mother's poetry book because I think it's important. A lot of the things comes out of her poetry, of her heart, of her struggles. And I could never go on without saying that I had a little hand on it. And I was a young teen, I told my mother, keep writing your poetry because I know that you have a broader world ahead of you. So that's what her poetry her poetry's root comes from. It comes from the organic place. It comes from her heart. It comes from her spirit. It comes from being a quilombola, yes, from this family that is so strong and tells, she could never tell these stories about her great grandmother without poetry. She could never tell these stories about her mother without poetry. Our grandmother, Rubina, who is a strong, strong woman, who back in the day said that her 7 daughters will never work in nobody's kitchen in Brazil. She knew what she was saying. Today, her granddaughters, one of them is here. She's a professor. She's an amazing lady, Luena Pereira. And Vitor was here, Vitor Manuel Rodrigues Nascimento. I don't know if Évora is here, but we all carry this root, this very strong root. And her poetry tells the story of a family, of a quilombo, of a family that has this really strong sense of quilombo, of sticking together no matter what. I'm in New York, I'm in Harlem, Luena is in Santa Teresa, Thomas is in Germany. We all over the place, but we still very, very, very much together. Vitor is in Niterói, at UFI, teaching at UFF, where my mother graduated. And Cláudia Nascimento, his wife, was my mother's girl, you know, her protege. And in a way, her daughter. So her poetry is this, her poetry is her life. And that's one thing about Black women today. Our lives are so valuable and it teaches us so much as artists, as intellectuals, as mothers, just, you know, as professionals in health, in everything. We have so much. And our Black men come with us, of course, our sons, our brothers, they come with us. So that's, when it comes to her poetry, that's what I want to say. It comes from a very deep place of a quilombo that lives inside us. And we as Brazilians, Afro-Brazilians must believe in that. And the Maroons and the other indigenous people around the world, we must believe in our inner quilombo. And I'm glad that we are translating this more and more, and we gotta keep on going. Thank you.
Well, I think that we just can't say anything after Betania said all of that. And I'm glad that you said it at the close, because that allows us to really leave with your words and your voice. And I think that that's really important. And every time you speak about your mother, it's just moving and beautiful and wonderful. I know that we could probably stay here all afternoon, but I'm sensitive of people's time, particularly the time of our panelists. And so I will say a quick thank you, but I want my co-hosts to say thank yous as well. I just want to say thank you to Pat Solo, to Alyssa Trotz, to Alex Hatz. We appreciate you. We appreciate all of you for being here. And we are going to just quickly before I pass it to everyone else, we are going to send out the recording of this video to everyone who was registered. And so you will be able to keep up with some of the things that were referenced, etc. But Tanya and Archie, do you want to say anything to close?
Just thank you again to Alex and to Pat and to Alyssa, and for such beautiful and thought-provoking responses, and to everybody for coming. And it just makes me think that it's such a privilege to be inside her work as this translator all the time and doing this all the time. And there's so many parts of her work which respond to all the things that have been said today in such an incredibly powerful way that it makes me just excited to try and get it out and to further that conversation. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much, my brother Alex. Thank you, Alyssa. I'm leaving this event with a crush on you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Where is she? I lost her.
Pat,
Pat,
there
thank
she
you
is
so
in the
much.
middle. Well, I
Pat,
don't know what she is on your screen. Sorry.
Pat, thank you so much. You making my dream, you helping my dream come true when it comes about Jamaica, when it comes about Nani. Yes, power to the people. We must be united. Thank you, Kristen, to stick with me. Thank you, Archie, for coming through and joining us. I feel very blessed today. Thank you, everybody, for coming over. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you so much, Betania. Do any of our panelists want to say anything before we close shop? Everyone's like, no. We will answer the questions we didn't get to. Oh, Pat, do you want to say something? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to say thank you so much. Thank you for introducing me to Nascimento's work, and I feel like that's somebody that I'm going to keep with me. I'm going to keep on looking at and finding out more. So thank you so much for all of that.
Thank you. And I know that we are going to answer the questions we didn't get to from our panelists. We are not forgotten and we're not evading the questions. We just ran out of time. So we will answer those. And as we close, we just want to share very quickly that we end our series at the Center for Women's and Gender Studies. Our Feminist Futures, Feminist Past Symposium will end this Friday with our final event. And so we encourage you all to come. We'll have Stacy Ann Chen, Fashili Nusomo, and Anya Freer. And I'm sorry if I'm not getting everyone's name perfectly correct. I respect all of their work and I have difficulty with names sometimes. And this is organized by Netta Odom. And so we hope that you're able to make it, Feminism and Young Children. And we are gonna close with something really, really special. And so Alyssa, if you want, just turn off your camera and turn off your sound. We really wanted to dedicate this session to Alyssa's mom, who just passed away. And we did not want this moment to go by without saying thank you to her for being here. It means a lot. And thank you, because I know it meant a lot to Betania. And now y'all are making me cry.
Kristen, I would like to say one thing. Being in Guyana, I know that I lost my mom to COVID here in Guyana. And I know that there are probably a lot of people on this call whose family members either got sick or got lost to COVID, because we know what the numbers are in Brazil. And this is the first public event I've done since my mother died 3 weeks ago. And it just feels, seeing this here today, just feels so perfect and so right that you're doing this. So thank you. And Betania, your tribute to your mom and the sacred love that you demonstrated there, that's a gift and something I will walk with. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. And we'll follow up, and take care and be well and hold your loved ones closely.